They sold over 150 million albums worldwide. They dominated the 1970s like no other American band. Their greatest hits became one of the most certified albums in U.S. history, 38 times platinum, 38 million units moved. Hotel California shifted 32 million copies globally and gave us one of the most iconic guitar solos ever recorded. They were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in their first year of eligibility. The RIAA ranks them among the top certified sellers in American history with 120 million units. Then it all collapsed. A backstage fistfight at a fundraiser that became legendary for all the wrong reasons. A firing that sparked a $50 million lawsuit. Decades of legal warfare over money, control, and who truly owned the legacy. Members who refused to share a stage, who couldn't even ride in the same elevator. A band so fractured that even a documentary about their history reignited the war instead of healing it. From stadium-filling legends to courtroom enemies. From brotherhood to betrayal. From the California dream to a nightmare that would haunt them for decades. This is the story of how harmony hid rot. How the same perfection that created legends also created enemies who would fight for the rest of their lives over what remained. How success didn't just change them, it destroyed them. But to understand the collapse, we have to go back to Los Angeles, 1971, where four ambitious musicians were about to create something that would define an era and ruin their lives. Los Angeles in 1971 wasn't just the home of rock and roll, it was where country met folk, where the Laurel Canyon scene was redefining American music, and where ambitious young musicians were trying to escape the working-class grind through sound. The city was electric with possibility, but also cutthroat, competitive, and unforgiving. Four of those musicians were Glenn Frey, Don Henley, Bernie Leadon, and Randy Meisner. They weren't stars yet. They were journeymen, session players, backup musicians watching from the wings. Frey and Henley had been playing backup for Linda Ronstadt, learning the craft, studying the machinery of the music business. They were hungry, talented, and smart enough to know that backup work wasn't the endgame. They wanted their names on the marquee. When they formed the Eagles and signed to Asylum Records, run by the legendary industry titan David Geffen, they had a crystal-clear vision. They would blend country twang, folk storytelling, and rock energy into something that captured the spirit of California itself. It wasn't just music. It was a lifestyle, a feeling, an identity. They were selling a dream. Their 1972 debut album Eagles introduced the world to their sound with surgical precision. Jackson Browne helped write the opening track, Take It Easy, which became their breakthrough, a song about freedom, the open road, and not letting the world weigh you down. Another early single, Witchy Woman, explored darker territory with mystical imagery and haunting vocals that hinted at something sinister beneath the surface. The formula worked immediately. The Eagles had created the California sound, sun-soaked harmonies hiding complicated, conflicted emotions. Their second album Desperado came in 1973, built entirely around the concept of outlaws and desperados living on the edge. The title track became one of their most enduring songs, a devastating ballad about a loner who won't let anybody love him, who's locked himself away emotionally. It didn't chart as high as their other work, but it defined their artistic identity, beautiful surfaces concealing loneliness, isolation, and loss. The contradiction was baked into their DNA from the start. By 1974, with their third album On the Border, the Eagles were evolving rapidly. They brought in Don Felder, a guitarist who added a harder rock edge and technical firepower. They brought in producer Bill Szymczyk, who would shape their sound for the next crucial years. The hit from that era, Already Gone, was a driving rocker that showed the band could do more than harmonize. They could bite, they could rock, they could compete with anyone. But even in the beginning, the seeds of destruction were already planted deep. Glenn Frey and Don Henley were emerging as the leaders, the visionaries who controlled the creative direction, the business decisions, the public image. The other members were incredibly talented musicians, essential to the sound, but the power structure was already dangerously imbalanced. The band wasn't a democracy. It was a hierarchy. Frey and Henley at the top, everyone else serving their vision. And in a group of perfectionists, ambitious artists, and strong personalities, that imbalance would fester, grow, and eventually explode. In 1975, the Eagles released One of These Nights, and everything changed overnight. It hit #1 on the Billboard 200. It produced 3 massive singles that dominated radio across the country: the title track, Lion Eyes, and Take It to the Limit. The Eagles weren't just popular anymore, they were inescapable. They were the soundtrack to mid-70s America, smooth, polished, irresistible, perfectly crafted. But beneath this triumph, serious tensions were already building. Bernie Leadon, one of the founding members and the band's connection to their country folk roots, left in 1975. He was tired of the direction the band was heading, away from the music he loved and toward arena rock, stadium shows, and commercial dominance. His departure was the first major crack in the foundation, the first sign that the Eagles' success came with casualties. His replacement was Joe Walsh, a hard-rocking guitarist with a wild reputation and a resume that included the James Gang. Walsh brought firepower, energy, and technical brilliance. He also brought chaos, unpredictability, and a lifestyle that clashed with the control-driven approach of Henley and Fry. The Eagles were now a stadium band, capable of delivering thunderous rock alongside their trademark harmonies. Their sound was bigger, louder, more powerful, and more commercial than ever. What fans didn't see was the pressure cooker they were living in behind the scenes. The band toured relentlessly, playing hundreds of shows, crisscrossing the country without breaks. The money was pouring in at levels they'd never imagined, but so were the demands. Media appearances, recording sessions, creative disagreements, lifestyle conflicts. Henley and Fry were control-driven perfectionists who demanded excellence at every turn, while others in the band wanted more freedom, more creative input, more respect, and more recognition for their contributions. And that's where the real trouble began. In 1976, the Eagles released their greatest hits, 1971 to 1975, a compilation that would go on to become one of the best-selling albums in American history. The numbers are staggering. It's been certified 38 times platinum by the RIAA, 38 million units sold in the United States alone. It's a commercial achievement so massive it's almost incomprehensible. The Eagles had become an unstoppable commercial juggernaut, a money-printing machine. But the real cost was building quietly underneath the success. Because while they looked like the perfect California success story on the outside, chart dominance, sold-out tours, magazine covers, awards, the band was fracturing on the inside. Resentments were growing like cancer. The pressure to stay on top was suffocating. Creative disagreements were turning into personal grudges. And the next album they were about to release would push them to their absolute breaking point and define their legacy forever. Hotel California dropped in December 1976, and it was a masterpiece, the kind of album that defines not just a band, but an entire era. The album hit #1 on the Billboard 200 and stayed there. It sold 26 million copies in the United States and over 32 million copies worldwide. It produced 2 #1 singles, New Kid in Town and the title track. Hotel California became more than just an album. It became a cultural touchstone, one of the most analyzed, debated, and celebrated works in rock history. The title track itself was released as a single on February 22, 1977, and it was a cinematic journey, dark, mysterious, atmospheric, and haunting. The story of how it came together reveals everything about the Eagles' genius and their dysfunction. Don Felder had written the music in a Malibu rental house, building the demo late at night using a drum machine and a 12-string guitar. He nicknamed it Mexican reggae because of its unusual feel. When he brought it to the band, Don Henley and Glenn Fry immediately recognized its potential and transformed it with lyrics that turned it into something profound, a meditation on excess, illusion, materialism, and the dark underbelly of the California dream. Henley later said the song reflected the end of innocence in 1970s Los Angeles, the moment when the dream curdled into something darker. Fry described it as a cinematic Twilight Zone style story where nothing is quite what it seems. The guitar solo, a twin-lead duel between Don Felder and Joe Walsh, became absolutely legendary. It lasts over 2 minutes, a conversation between 2 guitars that builds and builds until it reaches transcendence. It's considered one of the greatest guitar solos ever recorded, studied by musicians around the world. The song won the Grammy for Record of the Year in 1978. The Eagles had reached the absolute apex of their creative and commercial power. They were untouchable. But that moment of glory was also the beginning of the end. Because while they looked unstoppable on stage, selling out arenas, dominating the charts, collecting awards, being treated like royalty, everything offstage was cracking apart. The perfectionism that created Hotel California also created unbearable pressure. Recording sessions became battlegrounds where every note was debated, every decision questioned. Egos clashed violently. Creative disagreements turned deeply personal. The band that had preached harmony and sung about taking it easy was living in constant discord and tension. Success was eating them alive from the inside. The breaking point came during the making of their next album, The Long Run. Released in 1979, The Long Run was supposed to be the triumphant follow-up to Perfection. Instead, it became a symbol of everything wrong with the Eagles, everything that success had corrupted. The recording process was long, painful, and conflict-ridden. Sessions dragged on for months. Arguments became routine. Randy Meisner had already left the band in 1977, exhausted and burned out, replaced by Timothy B. Schmidt. The lineup was changing. The original chemistry was dying. The magic was gone. The album still produced major hits like Heartache Tonight, which showed the band could still deliver commercial gold. But the joy was completely gone. The Eagles were a machine now, efficient, professional, successful, and utterly joyless. They were going through the motions, fulfilling obligations, cashing checks, and barely tolerating each other. Then came the night everything exploded in spectacular fashion. July 31, 1980. Long Beach Arena in California. A benefit concert for Senator Alan Cranston. It would later be known by a darkly ironic nickname, The Long Night at Wrong Beach. During the show, Glenn Frey and Don Felder, two men who had created magic together on Hotel California, who had built something extraordinary, got into a vicious confrontation. Multiple sources report they threatened each other on stage in front of thousands of fans, hissing insults between songs. Backstage after the show, it escalated into a physical fight. The details vary wildly depending on who tells the story and when, but the result was undeniable and absolute. The Eagles were completely done. Finished. After that show, the band broke up immediately. Don Henley famously told reporters they would only reunite when hell freezes over. It wasn't a joke. It wasn't hyperbole. It was a solemn promise. The Eagles were finished, and the bitterness ran so deep that reconciliation seemed not just unlikely but genuinely impossible. The wounds were too deep, the betrayals too personal, the resentments too calcified. For 14 years, from 1980 to 1994, the Eagles stayed completely split. Glenn Frey launched a successful solo career with hits including The Heat Is On and You Belong to the City that became anthems of the 1980s. Don Henley did the same, creating introspective, critically acclaimed work including The Boys of Summer and The End of the Innocents. Joe Walsh continued his own solo success. The individual members thrived creatively and commercially. But the Eagles were dead. The dream was over. The brotherhood was destroyed. Then, in 1994, something completely unexpected happened that nobody saw coming. The Eagles appeared together in a music video for country artist Travis Tritt's cover of Take It Easy. It was a small gesture, seemingly insignificant, but it planted a seed. Fans erupted with excitement. The demand for a reunion became overwhelming, undeniable, impossible to ignore. And despite all the bitterness, despite all the years of silence and lawsuits and public feuding, the Eagles decided to try again. They called the reunion Hell Freezes Over, a darkly ironic, perfectly chosen nod to Henley's infamous quote that had become part of rock folklore. The tour was a massive success that exceeded even their own expectations. They packed stadiums around the world. They reminded everyone why they had been legends in the first place. The Hell Freezes Over album, featuring powerful live performances and new studio tracks, sold millions of copies. They were back on top, proving their music was timeless. For a moment, it genuinely felt like the story had found its happy ending. But the story wasn't over. Not even close. Because the reunion didn't heal the old wounds, it just papered over them temporarily with money and success. The same fundamental issues that had torn the band apart in 1980 were still there, festering beneath the surface. Control, money, respect, creative input, recognition. Glenn Frey and Don Henley remained the undisputed leaders, making all major decisions. The other members were still subordinates, employees essentially, working for the Frey-Henley Corporation. And one member in particular, Don Felder, was growing increasingly frustrated with his treatment and position. Between Felder and the leadership became completely unbearable. On February 6, 2001, Don Felder was fired from the Eagles with no warning. The firing of Don Felder wasn't just a personnel change or a business decision. It was a declaration of all-out war that would consume years and cost millions. Felder claimed publicly that the firing was entirely about profit splits and control. He argued passionately that Henley and Frey had systematically turned the Eagles into their personal empire, cutting out anyone who challenged them or demanded fair treatment. He said he was owed money, recognition, respect, and compensation for his contributions. So he did what anyone with resources would do. He sued. Felder sought approximately $50 million in damages for wrongful termination. He accused Henley and Frey of running the band like a brutal dictatorship, of deliberately rewriting history to diminish his contributions, of treating him as expendable and disposable despite his crucial role in the band's success and legacy. Henley and Frey countersued immediately and aggressively. They accused Felder of breach of contract and disloyalty. They went after him specifically for planning to release a tell-all memoir that would damage the band's carefully crafted reputation and public image. The legal battle was vicious, extremely public, and staggeringly expensive for everyone involved. For 6 brutal years, the Eagles were at war, not on stage performing music, but in courtrooms fighting over money and legacy. In 2007, the case was finally settled out of court. The terms were kept strictly confidential, sealed by legal agreement, but both sides declared some form of victory to save face. Felder went on to release his memoir anyway, Heaven and Hell, My Life in the Eagles, a book that pulled absolutely no punches in describing the dysfunction, the ego battles, the control issues, and the toxic dynamics that had defined the band's entire history from the beginning. The Eagles continued without him, never looking back. They brought in session guitarist Stuart Smith to fill the live lineup for tours. In 2007, they released Long Road Out of Eden, their first studio album in 28 years. It sold multiple millions of copies worldwide. The commercial machine kept running smoothly without missing a beat. But the legacy war wasn't over. Not by a long shot. When the Eagles released their official documentary History of the Eagles in 2013, it premiered at the prestigious Sundance Film Festival in January and then aired on Showtime in February. It won an Emmy Award for sound mixing. It was polished, authorized, expensive, and celebratory. It told the story of the Eagles as an unqualified triumph, a feel-good tale of talent meeting opportunity. Don Felder immediately and publicly criticized the documentary, calling it a shameless glorification of Henley and Frey that deliberately ignored or minimized the contributions of other members and rewrote history to serve their narrative. The documentary, instead of closing the book on the Eagles' contentious story, reignited the public debate about who deserved credit, who controlled the narrative, and who truly owned the legacy. Even decades after the original breakup, even after settlements and new albums, the Eagles were still fundamentally at war with themselves. Today, the Eagles are still performing, though what that means has changed dramatically. Glenn Frey died on January 18, 2016, ending one of the great creative partnerships in rock history and removing half of the leadership that had controlled the band for decades. His son, Deacon Frey, later joined the touring lineup to carry on his father's musical legacy and keep his memory alive. Randy Meisner, one of the founding members who had been there from the very beginning in 1971, died in 2023. The band that once embodied brotherhood and harmony is now essentially a ghost of its former self, held together primarily by memory, obligation, and commercial opportunity. Don Henley remains the unquestioned leader, the sole surviving guardian of the Eagles' legacy and business empire. He tours with the remaining original members and a collection of hired professional musicians, playing the classic hits to massive crowds who pay premium prices to hear songs that defined their youth. The music absolutely endures. The songwriting is genuinely timeless. The harmonies still soar beautifully. But the cost of that perfection was absolutely staggering. This is the ultimate story of how success created both legends and bitter enemies. How the same relentless drive that produced Hotel California also produced lawsuits, firings, and feuds that lasted decades and destroyed relationships permanently. How a band that sang about taking it easy, about freedom and the open road, couldn't take it easy themselves and became trapped by their own success. The Eagles proved conclusively that you can sell 150 million albums worldwide, dominate an entire era, win multiple Grammys, be inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in your first year of eligibility, and still lose the thing that mattered most in the beginning: the brotherhood, the friendship, the creative partnership that started it all back in Los Angeles in 1971. In 2023, the Eagles launched their farewell tour, appropriately and poignantly named The Long Goodbye. Stuart Smith, the guitarist who had replaced Felder and served loyally for years, retired in 2025 due to Parkinsonism. The Eagles are now playing out the final chapter of a story that's equal parts soaring triumph and devastating tragedy. The music will live forever in the culture. The legacy will endure through generations. But the band, the real band, the actual brotherhood that created the magic, died a long time ago in a backstage fight at a benefit concert in Long Beach. What remains is the music, the memories, and the cautionary tale of what happens when success becomes more important than the people who created it. So here's my question for you. What part of this story hits you the hardest? Was it the incredible magic of Hotel California, or the devastating tragedy of what came after? Did you ever see the Eagles live during any era of their career? Do you think the music and the legacy were ultimately worth the personal cost? Drop your thoughts, your memories, and your opinions in the comments below. If you want more stories about legendary bands and their rises and falls, because rock history is filled with cautionary tales just like this one, hit that subscribe button. The Eagles might be the biggest, most expensive cautionary tale of all. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.